It is August 7, 1889. The courtroom inside St. George's Hall in Liverpool, a magnificent neoclassical building in the heart of the city, its stone columns rising 40 feet, is packed to capacity. Every seat is taken. People are standing in the aisles. Outside, a crowd has gathered on the steps, waiting. A 26-year-old American woman stands in the dock. She has been in custody for nearly 3 months. She has spent those months in Walton jail while the newspapers of Britain and America argued about whether she was a calculating poisoner or the victim of the most prejudiced trial in Victorian history. She has had very little sleep. Her 2 young children, a son of 7, a daughter of 3, have been taken from her care. She has not been permitted to speak in her own defense because in Victorian England, a defendant in a criminal trial could not give sworn testimony. She could only listen as others spoke about her. The jury files back in. The foreman stands. The verdict is read. Guilty of willful murder. The courtroom erupts, but not, as you might expect, in satisfaction. A prolonged, strange sound passes through the room. Florence Maybrick later described it as like the sighing of wind through a forest. She sways. She grabs the rail of the dock. Outside, the crowd's reaction is different again. They cheer when Florence's prison van passes. They hiss at the judge. At Mr. Justice James Stephen, one of the most senior jurists in England, who has presided over this trial for 6 days and will now put on the black cap and sentence Florence Maybrick to death by hanging. The same judge who, only hours before the verdict was returned, was overheard to remark, "Well, they can't convict her on that evidence." The chief prosecutor nodded in agreement. And then the jury came back and convicted her anyway. Let us ponder over these questions as the story unfolds. Was Florence Maybrick guilty of murdering her husband, when the arsenic found in his body was less than 1/10 of the quantity required to kill a person? How does a judge who privately believes the evidence is insufficient produce a summing up so biased that it drives a jury to verdict in under 40 minutes, and what was happening to that judge's mind? Why, more than 135 years later, has Florence Maybrick's conviction never been formally quashed, even after a fresh application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission in January 2025. Before we go any further, if this kind of storytelling is what you have been looking for, the subscribe button is just below this video. We cover true crime from around the world, told with the detail and care it deserves. No sensationalism. No rushing through the facts. Just the full story, properly told. Hit subscribe, and you won't miss the next one. To understand what happened in that Liverpool courtroom, we have to go back. Back to a ship crossing the Atlantic in 1880. Back to a marriage that was troubled almost from its first year. And back to a house called Battlecrease, where the events of May 1889 would set in motion one of the most contested wrongful conviction cases in British legal history. Liverpool in the 1880s, the world the Maybricks inhabited. Liverpool in the 1880s was the second city of the British Empire. It is a port city on the northwestern coast of England, facing the Irish Sea, connected by water to the Americas, to West Africa, to the entire commercial reach of the British trading world. Cotton, in particular, flows through Liverpool in enormous quantities. Raw cotton arrives from the American South, from Egypt, from India. It is traded, financed, and shipped onwards to the textile mills of Lancashire. The men who deal in cotton, the brokers, the merchants, the traders, are among the most prosperous men in the city. James Maybrick is one of them. Liverpool in this era is also a city acutely conscious of class, of reputation, and of the particular horror that respectable Victorian society reserves for domestic scandal. The newspapers are powerful and intrusive, and the recent memory of the so-called Black Widows of Liverpool, a case from just 5 years before, in which women had used arsenic extracted from flypapers to poison for insurance money, hangs over the city like a shadow. That shadow will fall directly on Florence Maybrick. James Maybrick, the man Florence married. James Maybrick was born in Liverpool in 1838. By 1880 he was 42 years old, prosperous, sociable, and by all accounts charming to those outside his household. He is a member of the Palatine Club. He moves comfortably in the upper circles of Liverpool commercial society. He is also a deeply complicated man. James Maybrick is a hypochondriac. His doctors know it. His friends know it. He describes symptoms constantly, consults physicians regularly, and tries every patent medicine he can find. And sometime in the late 1870s, after receiving treatment for malaria that included arsenic and strychnine, both used medicinally in the era, he developed a habit. James Maybrick is an arsenic eater. Arsenic in small doses was believed by some Victorians to have tonic properties, to improve complexion, increase stamina, act as an aphrodisiac. In parts of Europe, peasants consumed it regularly. A city chemist later confirmed at trial that he had supplied James Maybrick with arsenic over a lengthy period. A search of Battlecrease House after James's death found enough arsenic, in various forms, to, in one contemporary's estimate, kill at least 50 people. This is the toxicological context in which Florence Maybrick is tried for her husband's murder. Florence, the girl on the ship. Florence Elizabeth Chandler was born on September 3, 1862, in Mobile, Alabama, a city on the Gulf Coast in the southern United States. Her father, a one-time mayor of Mobile, dies before her birth. Her mother, Caroline, is an unconventional woman who will prove, in the years of Florence's imprisonment, to be her most relentless advocate. In 1880, Florence was 17 years old. She is traveling to England with her mother on the ocean liner Baltic. On board that ship, she meets James Maybrick. He is 24 years her senior. Other passengers are reportedly unsettled by the amount of time the 42-year-old man spends in the company of the 17-year-old girl. Florence and James married on July 27, 1881, at St. James' Church in Piccadilly, London. She is 18. He is 42. They moved to Liverpool, settling into Battlecrease House in Aigburth, a comfortable Victorian villa in the southern suburbs of the city. They have 2 children, a son born in 1882, a daughter in 1886. From the outside, it looks like a prosperous Victorian household. From the inside, it is nothing of the sort. The marriage, what it actually looked like. James Maybrick has a life that Florence knows nothing about before their marriage and discovers only afterwards. He has a long-standing relationship with a woman in London who has borne him 5 children. This relationship continues throughout his marriage to Florence. His business associates knew about it. His wife did not at first. Florence, for her part, develops a friendship and then something more with a young Liverpool merchant named Alfred Brierly. In March 1889, Florence and Brierly spent 3 days together in a London hotel, signing the register as Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Maybrick. This is recklessly indiscreet. The affair is real, and it will be weaponized against her. James finds out. There is an assault. He announces his intention to seek a divorce. She, by her own later account, wanted the same. The marriage was over in everything but name. And then, at the end of April 1889, James Maybrick fell ill. The household at Battlecrease, the people who will testify. Before we get to the illness, the people inside Battlecrease need to be named, because they will each play decisive roles in what follows. Alice Yap is the nanny. She has, by multiple accounts, a strong personal dislike of Florence. Michael Maybrick is James's brother, a celebrated baritone singer who performs under the stage name Stephen Adams, deeply attached to James and deeply suspicious of Florence. He will, from the moment of James's death, drive the prosecution against her. Edwin Maybrick, another brother, comes to stay at Battlecrease during James's illness. He sides with Michael. This household is not disposed toward Florence Maybrick's innocence. April and May 1889, the last weeks. On April 27, 1889, James Maybrick attended the Wirral races and returned feeling unwell. His doctors treat him for acute dyspepsia. His condition oscillates over the following days, some improvement, some deterioration. This pattern will continue for 2 weeks. Here is the first thing to hold in your mind about this case. James Maybrick's symptoms, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, progressive deterioration, are consistent with acute gastroenteritis. They are also consistent with arsenic poisoning. And they are consistent with the effects of a man who has been consuming arsenic habitually for years and whose cumulative dose has reached a tipping point, or whose various patent medicines have interacted badly. The doctors do not seriously consider any of these explanations. They treat him for gastric trouble and watch him get worse. The flypapers. In late April or early May 1889, Florence Maybrick purchased flypapers from a local chemist. Flypapers in this era are sheets soaked in arsenic solution, used to kill flies. They are entirely ordinary, entirely legal household purchases. Any Victorian household might have them. Florence is seen soaking the flypapers in water. Her explanation, given later, is that she was extracting liquid for use as a cosmetic preparation, a face wash. Arsenic-based preparations were used for the complexion in this era. Hairdressers sold them. Florence's counsel calls witnesses at trial who confirm that arsenic solutions were requested by women for cosmetic use. Later forensic analysis of flypaper extraction methods suggests the yield of usable arsenic is extremely low, well under 10% of the arsenic content. It is not physically possible to extract a lethal dose from a small number of flypapers. The prosecution cannot demonstrate that Florence extracted enough arsenic from her flypapers to kill anyone. But Alice Yap sees Florence soaking the flypapers. And Alice Yap is watching Florence very carefully. The intercepted letter. The moment everything changes. On May 8, 1889, Florence wrote a letter to Alfred Brierly. She gives it to Alice Yap to post. Yap, according to her own account at trial, gives the letter to the Maybrick baby to carry to the post, and the letter falls into the dirt. Yap opens it, she says, to transfer it to a clean envelope. She reads it. The letter refers to James as perfectly ignorant of everything and describes his condition as sick unto death. The phrase sounds, to hostile eyes, like foreknowledge of a death that has not yet occurred. It also makes the affair with Brierly unmistakably clear. Yap does not post the letter. She gives it to Edwin Maybrick. Edwin gives it to Michael. Michael reads it, and immediately deposes Florence as mistress of the house. She is confined to one room, placed under surveillance, denied access to her sick husband except under the nurse's observation. The machine was in motion and it did not stop. May 9th, the Valentine's meat juice. The following day, a nurse reports to Michael Maybrick that she has observed Florence tampering with a bottle of Valentine's meat juice, a condensed meat extract given to patients too ill to eat. The bottle is tested. It is found to contain arsenic, half a grain. Florence's explanation: James had begged her to add it. He told her it would act as a pick-me-up, consistent with his long habit of self-medicating with arsenic tonics. Two things are critical here. First, James never drank from that bottle. It was never administered. Second, half a grain of arsenic is not a lethal dose. The established minimum lethal dose is 2 grains. Half a grain in a bottle that James never drank contributed nothing, by any rational assessment, to his death. But the image, a wife, alone with her dying husband, adding arsenic to his medicine, is exactly the image the prosecution will put before the jury. May 11, 1889. James Maybrick dies. James Maybrick died at Battlecrease House on May 11, 1889. His original attending physician intends to list gastritis as cause of death. He is pressured by Michael Maybrick to consider poisoning instead. The body is examined. It contains arsenic, 1/10 of a grain. The established fatal dose is a minimum of 2 grains. Given James Maybrick's documented history of habitual arsenic consumption, 1/10 of a grain could be entirely consistent with residual accumulation from his own long-term use. It is not, by any clinical standard, evidence of murder. Florence is arrested, taken to Walton Jail, and held for 6 weeks before her trial begins. The investigation. Who is actually running it? The formal investigation into James Maybrick's death is, in theory, conducted by the police and the coroner. In practice, it is driven by Michael Maybrick. Michael controls access to Battlecrease. Michael directs what the nurses report and to whom. Michael pushes for the exhumation and the chemical examination. Michael ensures Florence is isolated from the moment of James's death. This is worth noting. Michael, as the effective executor of the family's interests, benefits materially from Florence's conviction. The children are taken from her. The house reverts to family control. Florence gets nothing. Whether Michael had personal reasons beyond grief to drive her prosecution is a question the trial does not ask and that history has not fully answered. The first reversal, the medical evidence collapses under cross-examination. The trial opened at St. George's Hall in Liverpool on July 31, 1889. The prosecuting counsel is Sir Charles Russell, one of the finest advocates in England, who will later become Lord Chief Justice. The defence is led by Sir William Pickford. From the first day, there's a problem. The prosecution's medical evidence begins to collapse under cross-examination. The post-mortem shows arsenic in various tissues. The prosecution argues chronic arsenical poisoning, that Florence administered arsenic repeatedly, and the cumulative effect killed James. The defense calls its own experts, who make points the prosecution cannot answer. Point 1. 1/10 of a grain of arsenic is far below the established fatal dose of 2 grains. In a habitual arsenic user, this level is consistent with his own self-medication. Point 2. The post-mortem appearances are not specifically consistent with arsenical poisoning. Dr. Paul, for the defense, testifies that he would expect to find the stomach more affected and specific hemorrhages, petechiae, that are simply not present. Point 3. James's treating doctors, during his illness, did not consider arsenic poisoning as a possibility. The symptoms they described are consistent with gastroenteritis, or with strychnine effects, another substance James was known to consume. The prosecution's chief analyst, Dr. Thomas Stevenson, maintains the arsenic is consistent with criminal administration, but cannot say, under cross-examination, that it caused the death. At the end of 5 days of evidence, the prosecution's medical case is, in the assessment of multiple observers, insufficient. The chief prosecutor himself privately acknowledges this. And then Mr. Justice Stephen begins to sum up. The second reversal, the judge who turned the trial. Mr. Justice James Fitzjames Stephen was 60 years old in the summer of 1889. He is the author of major works on criminal law. He is considered one of the great legal minds of the Victorian era. He is also, by the summer of 1889, a man whose mind is failing. Stephen is in the early stages of what would now be recognized as severe cognitive decline, likely the result of a series of small strokes. His behavior on the bench in the years around the Maybrick trial has been noticed by colleagues. His brother, Sir Leslie Stephen, later describes the trial as a case where Stephen was wrong to attempt to turn a criminal court into, in his words, a school of morality. Within 3 years of the Maybrick verdict, Stephen was removed from the bench entirely as mentally unfit to serve. He was committed to an asylum in 1892. He died in 1894. The man who directed Florence Maybrick's conviction was, by the professional judgment of those who came after, no longer competent to judge. Stephen's summing up lasts 2 days. On the first afternoon, he is relatively balanced. Those present form the impression that Florence will be acquitted. Then he stops for the night and begins again the next morning. On the second day, the summing up abandons the forensic evidence and becomes a moral sermon. Stephen tells the jury that Florence committed adultery. He describes her affair as a dreadful injury inflicted on her husband. And then he says, and I want to quote this carefully because it is the sentence that condemned her. Your own hearts must tell you what it is for a person to go on administering poison to a helpless, sick man upon whom she has already inflicted a dreadful injury, an injury fatal to married life. The person who could do such a thing must be destitute of the least trace of human feeling. He does not say this is proven. He says your own hearts must tell you. He is telling 12 Victorian men that infidelity and murder are naturally linked. It takes the jury less than 40 minutes to convict. At this point I want to ask you directly. You have heard 5 days of medical evidence. The experts contradict each other. The arsenic in the body is 1/10 of a lethal dose. The victim was a documented habitual arsenic user. The defense has raised serious, unanswered questions about the prosecution's theory. And then the judge tells you that your heart should tell you a woman who commits adultery is capable of murder. How do you vote? Drop your answer in the comments. Because the answer tells us something important not just about 1889, but about how justice works right now. The third reversal. Imprisoned for a crime she was never charged with. Florence is sentenced to death. She spends 2 weeks in the condemned cell. The public outcry is immediate and enormous. Petitions pour in from Britain, America, and across the world. Medical experts publish analyses concluding the toxicological evidence does not support a finding of death by arsenical poisoning. The United States government makes representations on Florence's behalf. The Home Secretary reviews the case and writes to Queen Victoria on August 22, 1889. The evidence clearly establishes that Mrs. Maybrick administered arsenic to her husband with intent to murder, but there is ground for reasonable doubt whether the arsenic so administered was in fact the cause of his death. Florence's death sentence is commuted, but not to acquittal. Not to a reduced conviction for manslaughter. It is commuted to life imprisonment for attempted murder. A crime she was never tried for, never charged with, for which no jury ever heard evidence. She is imprisoned under a conviction that does not exist. This is not a legal technicality. It is a fundamental miscarriage of justice, and it is never corrected. Who was Florence Maybrick really? Florence is consistently described as beautiful, charming, socially accomplished. What gets less attention is that she is also genuinely intelligent. She manages a considerable Victorian household effectively for years, and she writes, after her release, a memoir that is clear-eyed, specific, and entirely lacking in self-pity. Was she entirely innocent in every sense? Almost certainly not. Her affair with Brierly was real. Her soaking of the flypapers was real. Whether she added arsenic to the Valentine's meat juice at James's request, as she said, or on her own initiative, we cannot know. But the evidence does not support that she murdered her husband. The arsenic in his body did not kill him. He may have died from the cumulative effects of his own drug habit. He may have died from acute gastroenteritis. He almost certainly did not die from what Florence administered, given the quantities found. The verdict was not about what Florence did to James Maybrick's body. It was about what Florence had done to the institution of Victorian marriage. Justice Stephen A. Mind in collapse. After the Maybrick trial, Stephen's deterioration accelerates rapidly. Within 2 years he is making errors in court and behaving erratically on the bench. In 1891 he was compelled to resign. In 1892 he was committed to an asylum. He died in 1894. His own later written work notes that the Florence Maybrick case was the only one of 979 trials he had presided over between 1885 and 1889 where there could be any doubt about the facts. He knew. At some level, he knew the evidence did not support the verdict. He said so, privately, after the jury retired. And yet in his summing up he produced what legal historians describe as one of the most prejudiced directions to a jury in Victorian legal history. A woman spent 14 years in prison because a judge whose mental fitness was considered so impaired that he had to be removed from the judiciary within 3 years was, in August 1889, directing a murder trial. Alice Yap, the woman who read the letter. Alice Yap's act of opening Florence's letter, reading it, handing it to Edwin Maybrick instead of posting it, is not a neutral act. Under cross-examination by Sir Charles Russell, her account of why she opened the letter is inconsistent. She says it fell in the dirt. She says it was showery. She cannot explain why she didn't simply transfer it to a clean envelope without reading it. Russell presses her. He establishes that Yap had previously given letters to the baby to post, meaning her claim that a dropped letter prompted her to open it is, at best, convenient. What Yap had was what Florence's enemies in that household needed. Evidence of the affair. She delivered it to the people who would use it. The consequences for Florence were catastrophic. The Victorian double standard. James's conduct, unexamined. Here is what I find most difficult about this case. James Maybrick has a long-term relationship with another woman, a relationship that produces 5 children. This continues throughout his marriage to Florence. His business associates know about it. Florence's affair with Brierly, brief, reckless, acknowledged by Florence herself, is treated in the summing up and in the press as evidence of her capacity for murder. James's conduct is mentioned at trial and then set aside. Not relevant, apparently, to the question of who might have wanted to escape this marriage. And here is the financial reality that the trial essentially ignores. The provision James made for Florence in his will is, in the assessment of contemporaries, remarkably paltry. Florence stood to gain more from James alive and married to her than from James dead and leaving her almost nothing. If anyone had a material motive to keep James alive, the financial evidence suggests it was Florence. This argument is made at trial. It does not penetrate 40 minutes of deliberation. 14 years, 4 months, 28 days. Florence Maybrick entered Woking female convict prison in the autumn of 1889. The separate system, 9 months of near-complete isolation, is the first thing she faces. No contact with other prisoners. No speech permitted. Her identity was reduced to a number sewn on her uniform. L.P.29. L for life. P for the year. 29 for her place in the intake of 1889. Her mother campaigns ceaselessly from France. The Lord Chief Justice himself, Lord Russell of Killowen, formerly the chief prosecutor who privately believed the evidence was insufficient, works to secure Florence's release. He cannot. The Home Office declines to act. Florence's children grow up without her. Her son and daughter are raised by the Maybrick family. She does not see them during her imprisonment. She was released on January 25, 1904, at 6:45 in the morning, into a grey winter dawn, after 14 years, 4 months, and 28 days in custody. America and the final years. Florence returns to the United States. In 1904 she published her memoir, Mrs. Maybrick's Own Story, My 15 Lost Years. It is a detailed, measured account, not hysterical, not self-pitying. It maintains, consistently and clearly, that she was wrongly convicted. She eventually settled in South Kent, Connecticut. She never remarries. Contact with her children, now grown, is limited. In her last years she lived alone, in modest circumstances that have become destitute, surrounded by cats. Florence Maybrick died on October 23, 1941, in South Kent, Connecticut. She is 78 years old. She dies maintaining her innocence. What the case changed, the Court of Criminal Appeal. The Florence Maybrick case does not end with Florence's death. Its consequences are structural and permanent. In 1907, the British Parliament passed the Criminal Appeal Act, establishing the Court of Criminal Appeal, a judicial body with the power to review criminal convictions, hear new evidence, and overturn verdicts where the original trial was improperly conducted. The Maybrick case is one of 4 cases specifically cited in discussions leading to that court's creation. The idea that a judge's prejudice summing up could drive a jury to convict on insufficient evidence, with no mechanism to correct it, was, to the legal reformers of the era, intolerable. The Court of Criminal Appeal is the institutional ancestor of what is now the Court of Appeal Criminal Division in England and Wales. Every person who has had a wrongful conviction overturned in Britain in the past century has benefited, at least indirectly, from the outrage that followed Florence Maybrick's trial. 2025. The conviction that still stands. In January 2025, descendants of both the Maybrick and Chandler families submitted a formal application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission to have Florence's conviction quashed. The application was rejected, not on the merits, but on technical grounds. Florence Maybrick is dead. She cannot be a party to appeal proceedings in the conventional sense. The commission determined that a referral was not possible. The conviction stands. Florence Maybrick was convicted of the murder of James Maybrick on August 7, 1889. She has never been formally exonerated. Her conviction has never been quashed. The Court of Criminal Appeal exists, in part, because of what happened to her. Legal scholars describe her trial as one of the greatest travesties of justice in British legal history. The judge who directed her conviction was removed from the bench within 3 years as mentally unfit. The medical evidence was documented as insufficient to support a finding of death by arsenical poisoning. And still the conviction stands. What remains? Florence Maybrick said it herself, in the dock on the day of sentencing, the last words the law permitted her to speak: "My lord, everything has been against me. I am not guilty of this crime." What was against her? A hostile household run by her husband's family from the moment of his death. A nanny who opened her letters and handed them to her enemies. A judge whose mind was, it later became clear, in the early stages of severe deterioration. A jury told, plainly, that a woman who commits adultery is capable of murder. A Victorian legal system that gave a defendant no right to testify in her own defense. What the evidence actually showed: a man with a long history of arsenic use died of an illness whose cause was never definitively established. His body contained arsenic in quantities that his own known habits could explain. His wife had arsenic in her possession and had added a small quantity to a bottle of medicine that James never drank. This is not nothing, but it is not murder. And the Home Secretary acknowledged that much in 1889, when he commuted the death sentence because he could not be confident the arsenic had caused the death. The arsenic did not kill James Maybrick. The judge who directed the conviction was not fit to be on the bench. Florence Maybrick lost 14 years of her life, her children's childhoods, and eventually everything she had. She died in Connecticut in 1941, having spent more than half a century insisting on her innocence. Battle Crease House still stands in Aigburth, Liverpool. The conviction still stands too.